If your neighbor's house is burning, you do not think how this will affect their lives and their children's lives in the future. You do not think how this will affect property prices. You simply take them out of the house. The Garden of Eden is torture ad infinitum. Lucifer freed them from eternal torture, and this is why his act was legitimate. Two quick things I want to clarify as to what people were like and what is part of this debate and what isn't. Firstly, I asked a motion clarification about knowledge. No one answered. So my best reading of the Bible, and Max, who's Christian Orthodox, is that knowledge was a symbolic meaning in this context. And what that specifically was the ability for humans to exercise free will and engage in free will broadly after exiting the Garden of Eden. The second thing I want to clarify is that this isn't the Bible. In Milosh's words, we're not debating about the book. Instead, we're debating about what was specifically in the info slide, which is what we'll make all of our claims from. First thing I want to prove is that people could feel things, i.e. Adam and Eve, could feel things in the Garden of Eden. How do we know this? Because they felt temptation when the snake offered them the apple. They felt hunger and loneliness when Eve was created, which is what made God want to create her in the first place. And what this reveals is that even if they didn't have knowledge and free will, they had the capacity to feel happy or sad, bored and alone, and so on and so forth. And that means that these feelings, much in the same way that you and I feel things, are as valid and as preferences that we ought to care about. The second thing I want to point out is that these feelings inform the way that we think about, good or bad things writ large. So if we're able to prove that there is infinite disutility in the act of keeping them within the Garden of Eden, that shows that this act is justified. Why then is living forever in the Garden of Eden absolute torture? First, when infinity exists, when you will never die, there's nothing to cement your life around and give you purpose for it. There's nothing for you to do today or tomorrow, and only finite amounts of things to entertain your mind. Let's be really clear about what the Garden of Eden was, right? It isn't the case that the Garden of Eden was this infinite roller coaster park with all the things that you could ever want to do forever. That is A, math that was just fundamentally impossible because infinite things don't exist. But B, the Garden of Eden was obviously just a garden, and they were just frolicking around in the garden, etc., etc. But this is crucial, right? Because I think as human beings, we have a tendency to believe that our life has meaning or purpose because there's some finiteness to it, right? I feel scared about my job interview because I believe I won't be able to get that job in the future. I asked my girlfriend out because I think that, I won't have that opportunity down the line. But when you live forever, all opportunities will always exist and you will exhaust all of them forever. This is extremely bad. First, because the longer you crave things, like the loneliness that Adam craved that made God create Eve, the bigger they become in your mind. Think about it, right? When you're withdrawn from food for over a day, you starve much, much more abundantly. And this means that when you crave something more, which people are likely to because feelings still exist, all other experiences and relationships in your life become boring. That means Adam and Eve grow bored of each other eventually. That means you grow bored of the garden that you're in, even if it's a really, really beautiful garden. And I want you to understand, maybe this takes billions of years, that it's still less than 0.0001% of all time that they will be alive for. Infinity is a concept that is so absolutely vast that in the absolute vastness, you will eventually feel bored. That is the statistical guarantee in this debate. And this is awful because in their side, you also have no degree of agency, in the act. You cannot do anything that makes you happy or sad once you feel the sense of boredom. And that is the worst form of torture there is because you will never be able to escape from it. You will never be able to eat the apple. You will never be able to do the things that gave you free will and allowed you to form purpose like we all have in this room. And this compounds over time as well. It becomes more and more arduous once you hit that wall of boredom. And it transitions from boredom to abject torture which they must defend forever. The next thing I want to prove, I'll take you after this, is why it is therefore, in and of itself, a justified act to save us, even if in their best case, and maybe CG can prove that life is suffering or not suffering, I don't want to engage in the Euros finals. First of all, Lucifer did not have omniscience. And we know this because if he did have omniscience, he would not have disobeyed God in a way that would have turned him into a devil, right? So presumably, he does not have the perfect understanding of the way life would have played out and was not acting in absolute malice when he made this act. And I would note, the way that we describe something as justified, whether describing something as a consequentially good act, are fundamentally different. Think back to my opening intro. If I save someone from a drowning river, and that means they get to walk, but then later on go and drown, that's not my fault. I saved them from a drowning river, and it was justified that I saved them drowning in a river. And it was justified that I did that insofar as, to my knowledge, that was the best possible act for me to do. And in this situation, given that Lucifer is confronted by the abject torture that everyone feels in the Garden of Eden, or the two people feel, it is therefore justified that he freed them. And in fact, it is a moral obligation that he freed them, and we're willing to defend that on our side of the house. They might have something around the lines of consent. Maybe he manipulated them. But I would note that they were tempted into it and still made the choice actively. I'm tempted when I see a Big Mac. I mean, look at me. But I still go and eat it, right? That doesn't make McDonald's at fault necessarily. I have some level of active choice in the way that I chose that. So it was not only morally permissible, it was justified and therefore a freeing from the torture that Lucifer currently knew about.
Sure. Look, you give reasons, everything, but you want to prove that the Garden of Eden was objective, endless torture? This is hard, no?
Yes, I did. Okay. Anyways. Why does this win this debate outright? First, we take a far lower burden in this debate than I think anything else that is broadly speculative, right? Maybe life is suffering, maybe life isn't suffering. I think we don't know what life will be like down the line, and I think we all have different interactions and experiences with life that we can't sum up because a simple utility machine simply doesn't exist. What we do know is that infinity is suffering, and infinite life is the exact thing that everyone in this garden would have felt forever on their side of the house. And what that means is, even if all other teams are able to prove that people suffer now, that is a suffering that was not in the decision calculus of Lucifer at the time, but B, not a suffering that we ought to care about when thinking about something whether or not is justified. The very last thing I want to do is just quickly start off the life is suffering and not debate, because I have some time left. First of all, I think it is a good thing to exist because we are revealed preference thankful for our existence, right? Most people continue to choose to live. Most people are grateful for the fact that they got to live. And in some sense, Lucifer is responsible for that, so we ought to be thankful for that. And I would note things that we're thankful for or grateful for often do give us an understanding of the things that are broadly justified in our world, right? So for example, Prometheus was justified even though he gave us fire because it allowed us to do a bunch of technological advancements. And we're thankful for that. That shows that this was a broadly utile positive act. I think our first argument wins this debate. I think life was suffering, yes, but it was far more suffering on their side. Incredibly proud to propose.
For responses to boredom, one response to the point about lack of omniscience. The point about boredom. One, I'm not exactly sure as to why boredom means that I'm necessarily going to be unhappy, even if it does exist. For example, my dog doesn't have the biggest brain on the planet, and he doesn't do many different things, but he is very satisfied every single time we play catch, even though it's the same game over and over and over again, with the same meal. And I'm not sure as to why this is bad. He's probably one of the happiest dogs alive. Shout out to Oliver. Second one. The fact of the matter is that God is, in this motion, real. This means that when you are bored, when you are lonely, as Adam was, he gave him Eve. Assuming this is true, probably the situation in the Garden of Eden has the potential to change, as insofar as God sees that the people are suffering, bored, and want to do something else, then God can do something. The nice thing about being up in this motion is that we have God on our side. 3. The apple was already there, so if the people were bored, I'm not exactly sure why Satan had to be the one that tempted us to do it more. As in, we could have just eaten it, we didn't, and the difference was what made us fall from heaven. Lastly, it's not as if, even if he did save us from Eden at that point, we will never return, because if you are good Christians, you're going to go to heaven. This is Eden, by the way. It is literally the embodiment of all good. This means that the exact same boredom that OG is talking about, we're not being saved from it. But on government side, guess what also exists? Hell. Bad, because not only do you get boredom, you get torture, endless flames, and suffering. That's, I think, on a comparison, worse than just being bored. Next, on the idea of omniscience. I think that that's a weird clash. Because one is, just because you see someone that is in not the most ideal situations, no thank you, one, recognize that these people weren't suffering at the time of this, as in, you don't know if in the future these people are going to be bored out of their minds and being tortured to this degree. This means that he assumed that this was bad. I'm not sure that this is a good assumption. So the omniscience, although is not present, I'm not exactly sure as to why you're legitimate in assuming. I don't assume that my neighbors are bored and knock on their door and infringe on their privacy, so I'm not sure why this is legitimate from his side. Insofar as this is true, I'm not exactly sure what OG's case is. First argument, how this is just bad because we lose Eden.
You are.
No, thank you. Eden is beautiful. It is all, it is one. We are one with it at the point at which we are there. Now we are sinners, but God is also good. And at the point of which we die, we return to heaven. There's two reasons why this is true. One, it's empirical, as in we know that this is true. If this isn't true, I don't know. But also, let's think about it in a logic perspective. No, it is God that created us. It is God that created every single beautiful thing that is existing. So probably the place that He thought of us to be is also beautiful, is also meant to be for us. People there were also good. They were the creation of everything that God had hoped, and we were His, in fact, favorite children. This means that by the act of tempting us into eating the apple, He created the imperfection within us, created sin, created suffering, created greed, pride, and every other thing that has made anything bad happening. And this is, I think, bad, because although Satan probably didn't know that much about the situation that we were in, because I guess he's not omniscient, he probably did know that we were beautiful and that we were great, because he did have eyes, we were fucking cool. This means that he was aware that he was taking something away from us, because some reason happens, but not only from Eve, who took the apple, let's say voluntarily, although I have an analysis as to why that wasn't true. No, thank you. But also throughout generations, every single one of you might go to hell. Every single one of you will experience suffering throughout your lives. Will have to take on trials and tribulations of high school romance, I don't know. And this means that you're going to have to face suffering, pain, and everything like that. All of this could have not happened to you. You could have been good this whole time, experienced only bliss, and not have to think about anything else. That's, I think, a crime. No, thank you. Second argument of how these people were unable to consent. One, as per Imposlide, these people were empirically just the best people ever. This means that these people did not know about evil, did not know about people that wanted to lie to you, that wanted to deceive you, steal from you, take advantage of you, and things like that. So there was no way for them to be able to be informed in the way that in the things that they were consenting into. They assumed that the thing that the serpent wanted was a good thing, because that was the only thing they knew so far. This means that at the point of which Satan wanted us to eat the apple, he wanted people that were unable fundamentally to consent to do something that they were unable to consent. And that's, I think, quite bad, because contracts you need to be able to opt out of them, but also need to be, to some degree, informed. And if, as far as these people were unable structurally to be informed, the act of temptation was impossible. I'll take closing.
Is my relationship now more or less valuable because the relationship I had in high school was bad?
Okay, I'll just now respond to the value of sin and things like that. One, the value of sin is already present within Eden because the apple exists, as in the temptation already exists. And every single moment that you experience bliss, you are aware that the reason as to why you're experiencing bliss is because you followed God's rule and because you are able to appreciate the things that you already have. So it is in fact still valuable, the experience that you have without having to suffer in the first place. Two, the idea of having the lack of control and also all of these things within individuals. Even if the value of the life is increased at the point of which you have experienced pain, this is not contingent to the Satan's act. Two reasons why. One, OG literally says that he didn't know that suffering is going to happen. This means that he did not know whether or not suffering is going to elevate or subtract from the experiences of this person's life. This is important because even if we see that eating the apple was fundamentally a good idea, we cannot show you that the consequentialist analysis in this situation was because of Satan, and thus we cannot show you that this is legitimate. Lastly, I think that he was just kind of a bit jealous, right? This is true for for the Bible's canon, but also think about it. He was the favorite son, but even if he wasn't, there were other angels and they were perfect. And then these people came that were stupid and didn't know what to do. I do think that the incentives coming from him were a bit corrupt, and I don't think that a legitimate action can be happening from that. For all these reasons,
You panel are not a dog. Shocking. But you are different in a dog in the way that playing around in a garden, playing fetch, cannot satiate you. You are better than that. You are an aspirational being, a being which aspires to create, to imagine, to be, to act. And that is exactly what the Garden of Eden takes away from you. It is in the Garden of Eden where a dog would be happy, not a human. And you're a human panel, so are Adam and Eve. That was what God made us. Jack, maybe not you, you're like really big, but like most of us, right? And that is exactly why we think the Garden of Eden is torture. Our burden as OG is very low and very simple. We need to argue that from the point of view of Lucifer at the time, the Garden of Evil was foreseeably torturous and therefore rationally legitimate to remove someone from it, to save them from this process. Note, I think that the people were already starting to feel it, because God had told them the apple is evil. God had told them that knowledge would cast them away from the Garden of Eden. Yet that temptation was in their hearts. That temptation was something which mattered to them. And I think this is indicative of their greater nature. First thing, why do we think that humans would not be happy at infinitum? The first thing is that I don't think God can create an infinite number of things. I know this is like a weird explanation, but like an all-powerful being can't do everything. Like for instance, they can't kill themselves. That's a paradox. The implication of that is that I don't think they can create an infinite number of things which are entertaining for you. And even if they were able to create, I think living as God's parasite, as their lapdog, as their pet, is an undignified experience, an undignified life us humans are simply beyond. You don't feel like something matters when you didn't work for it. With people, and the way we know this is that people who get jobs because they're Nepo babies, in their hearts, they might enjoy the fruits of that, but they feel unsatiated because they know they didn't earn something. If you win a round and you didn't deserve it, yes, you got the point, but you didn't feel it, which is why we're happy today. Second, I think humans have an ego. They view themselves as personal. They have ambitions. They have prides. And I think this means we crave the opportunities which life gives us, and we despise the limitations which the Garden of Eden gives us. And very importantly, it was God who made us in this way. Lucifer in no way altered our fundamental existence. He played on the characteristics God gave us: jealousy, pain, aspiration, envy. All of the things which would have made us miserable living in his laps. The implication of this is simple. Per the most certain information in this debate, we think we would have been miserable in this case. But here's the thing. Lucifer saw this. And I think this is why we got tempted. I think that people were already suffering. But even if this weren't the case, I think Lucifer is rationally able to predict this. Because think of it this way. If Tanush and I have convinced you in around 10 minutes right now that there's a very good chance that the Garden of Eden was eternally torturous, Lucifer could have seen this and rationalized it to himself. And therefore, this is valid information for him to act upon, even if it is not epistemically certain, because we think nothing in life or in any decision is certain in an absolute sense. We make reasonable judgments based on the information we had available, which then means that even if we cannot convince you this fully, so long as there's a good chance this was eternally torturous and the other things were uncertain, it doesn't matter. Because think of it this way. Let's say there's a pill which hurts you in a 35% chance of instances. I would still want to stop you from that, even if I don't know that your neighbor will get really angry at you and hit you, or otherwise other harms might occur to you if you don't take that pill. The safe moral decision is to err on the side of caution and act on the available information. And I do just think that it is the most available information, because there's a hopelessness which you have in the Garden of Eden, when you know nothing can change and nothing will change, because you know that there's no control you might have, which is not the type of control Lucifer gave you. We think that he acted very justifiably. Now they tell you that heaven might create infinite pain and you subject that to people. First of all, there is nothing in the info slide telling us heaven does or doesn't exist, entirely uncertain as to why this happened. Second, I'm not sure how Lucifer knows this. Heaven presumably was created after the Garden of Eden, because you had to die to go to heaven. So he didn't know God could do this. I don't know how he could foresee this. Why is then available information the only moral basis for acting on information, and that makes it justified? Two things. First of all, There's always an infinite number of foreseeable outcomes of any given choice. The butterfly effect is real. Bumping into someone might make them late to work, might lead to them being fired, might lead to them getting angry into an argument, and then like running off and bad things happening. Not your fault. What we think is more reasonable is acting on the available information you have, making reasonable predictions, because the alternative is moral paralysis. Second, we think it is unfair. We think it is genuinely unfair to believe that something is not justifiable, to punish people morally or otherwise for something they didn't know. You're just not respecting them as people. And the reason we know this is that like most legal systems, most moral systems accept this, and opening opposition's argument on consent accepts this. Because when you're not informed about something, you can't consent to it, and that is why information matters morally. Closing? Okay, I thought you guys would have more to say in emotion about God and heaven, you know? Cool. Why do we then think that giving us free will is not just justifiable, it is plausibly correct? These are two entirely different burdens. We're just taking the higher one because me and Tanush are just like cool like that. Right. Two things. First of all, I think humans have a declared preference from things like freedom and for things like survival. These are things we fight tooth and nail for. What living Eden does is gives us a couple of things. First of all, it gives us freedoms. We no longer need to listen to God. We can make our own path. And you might say that this is the wrong path, but who are you to say? Why is God a good moral actor? Genuinely, he put us in this torture chamber. He put us in a situation of absolute hopelessness. I think we should doubt the morality of this individual. We think we crave this survival, and we get this. And even if that is something which is bad for us, I think Lucifer was respecting our preferences by honoring that and giving us that choice. I think he was acting on our consent and expanding that benefit to a lot more. Because on their side, existence is gate-kept for two like people who are suffering. Under our side, so many of us can enjoy the beauties of life. And I think that this is great. Second, I think life is just broadly utile. The reason we know this is that most humans have a declared preference for life. They have options to take their own life or to otherwise stop it, yet the vast majority of them do not. This is enough for you to conclude that most of us are happy as is. Lucifer is not a devil, he is a liberator. Propose.
I really don't know why opening government thinks that humans are inherently superior to dogs or any other animals for that matter. Outside of the fact that I think dogs are cool, I want to deconstruct the logic that they use. The logic that they use is that people have inherent needs for stuff like knowledge, survival, fight, ambition. Guys, this isn't true until the point where the motion happens and people choose to consume the apple. The stuff that you get, as in your ambition to survive, to fight, to cut others' throats to ensure that you are going to be the one that's going to be alive, happens when you ate that apple. The ambition to be superior to other human beings and also to dogs, you know, those cute little fluffy creatures, happens once you've eaten that apple. The necessity for higher things like knowledge, even positive higher things, like a greater extent of comprehension or moral superiority or any degree of, higher pleasures happens at that point. Prior to the passing of the motion, I'm sorry to inform opening government, but they are a dog, if not less. They don't have the capacity to think. They don't have the capacity to have the knowledge, rationalization, and free will of the type of stuff they claim that you care about. So a lot of the biological claims on opening government just cannot be credited in that regard. But let's deal with the second thing, because they say that the important thing here is, the internal understanding and the fact that you can kind of reasonably foresee the fact that it's happening and that suffering is happening. The thing is, if you listen to PM, it's likely that this takes anywhere from, 1 million years to 1 billion years. I agree God can't do, absolutely everything, but he sure as fuck can probably do a lot, right? So you never know the concrete point at which this probably happens, and this kind of thing activates, and the torture activates. The important mech here is that humans have the capacity to eat this apple on either side of the house, because they have the capacity to feel hunger and choose to take it. I'll add a flip to this later, but just on a level of intuition, if you cannot comprehend the precise moment at which suffering begins, you don't have a moral obligation to pull people out of rivers in which they're not physically present. You don't have an obligation to prevent individuals from ever approaching rivers because they sometimes choose to jump and drown in them. If you're unable to identify the precise moment, the moral claim from opening government doesn't work. But finally, let's deal with the flip that I said before. by taking the capacity of the people to opt for knowledge, even if you buy opening government's premise that there is an intrinsic desire for more in individuals, the desire ought to be rationalized individually in order to be fulfilled. So the reason that you want to experience stuff like, knowledge, pain, pleasure, etc., is for the fulfillment of the greater values of life, as opening government chooses to claim. Being forced into doing this never gave you the cognitive ability to access the benefits of achieving a level of self-satisfaction, of achieving the level of fulfillment that opening government wants to claim. It is not you who have chosen to enter into a world of realness and into a world of fulfillment. It is not you who opted for the feelings that you're currently experiencing, but somebody that imposed this upon you in a state in which you weren't conscious. This is important, because then you choose to credit a lot of, the biological analysis. By that logic, there's a point at which individuals would have opted for this anyways, and the choice is more legitimate. Sure, there might be some legitimacy in the action, but you cannot consider an action legitimate because it's stripped away people of the greater autonomy. They talk about foreseeability. If what opening government says is correct, and I think logic-wise most of the time it is, Satan could have foreseen this and therefore assumed that the taking away of this autonomy is a greater sin than the thing that he did in and of itself, because people would have the capacity to opt for this in the reasonable future. Secondly, let's impact the stuff that Mai gives to you and as to why you definitively are able to know that life is bad. Because I think it's a valid challenge to say that you need to be able to foresee these things to a reasonable extent. Firstly, why is it true that likely massive amounts of suffering and eternal suffering are going to apply to absolutely all individuals past the point when you've eaten the apple? One, with the knowledge of foresight, you know a couple of things. One, that this is an irreversible action, as in people will be expelled from the Garden of Eden, and this will happen for generations and millions of years to come. So the same infinity is going to be just split apart on more individuals. I want to note, in this value debate, you're not judging it on any particular individual person. You can amass all the people that have lived after this into a single entity of suffering, because there's no one actor that you need to care about to a greater extent. The reason that this is important, why is it very probable that suffering happens past this point? Firstly, because knowledge grants you the capacity to feel a lot of suffering. And this is also a response to what opening government gives to you about, how you're better than a dog. A lot of the claims as to the suffering that you feel, the stuff that opening government says, is only unlocked once you've experienced knowledge. So you can only feel completely useless, empty, desolate, and just depressed into absolutely nothing once you've gained the cognitive ability and the free will to desire more and to comprehend this. Prior to this point, you're unable to feel such extents of boredom and other things, but you're also unable to feel things that people actually have felt afterwards and you can reasonably conceive. You're unable to feel yourself in the position when you're bored in a place when you know you will die, you dread the fact that you will die, and there's nothing that you can do about it. You will not have been born in war zones when you know that any week now you're going to be bombed and there's nothing that you can do, but you must live with the knowledge that this will happen. You must live with the pain of your injuries. You must live with the knowledge of all of the suffering that happened before you and is likely to happen after you. This is definitive not only because it's likely by the realities of life, because on a balance of probability, if this is an irreversible action, there will be an infinite number of people afterwards that will experience this at some point. And this is the crucial difference of this. I'll take closing.
Why does Lucifer believe that God is good?
I don't care that Lucifer believes that God is good or not. Lucifer can think that God is a massive piece of shit. This doesn't change the things that we tell you as to the suffering that is imposed on individuals, as to the massive harms that this has subjected them to. Finally, even if there's not a greater amount of net suffering, because they're both comparable infinities, it is a worse type of suffering that individuals are likely to experience over the longer period of time, for a couple of structural reasons. One, it is far more comprehensible and immediate to individuals that are outside the Garden of Eden. It is tied to things like fear. It is tied to things like the fear of death. It is a fear of pain. It is a fear that you've never experienced previously. B, you can cognitively understand for higher extents of suffering. You can be tortured not only physically in terms of boredom or hunger, but mentally by comprehending your own torture, by seeing the tools the torturers use to slowly cut your body into a million pieces, comprehend every single moment of pain that you're going through. This is a far greater extent of suffering because of more cognitive capacity to comprehend it. The weighing is very simple. First, it's on whom it is imposed. It's imposed on the most innocent people to have ever existed. It's imposed on people who have done nothing even close to deserving this type of thing. On people who never had the capacity to comprehend the types of evils and suffering that they would have been subjected to after. It's equally eternal, but in greater measure. finally, knowledge isn't always good and isn't in itself beneficial. Oftentimes it increases your capacity to feel suffering. Therefore, oh well.
This is not necessarily a debate about humanity, but a debate about Lucifer and the wrongs that were done to him under a God that was hateful, under a God that was evil. A few things to note at the start of this debate. The things that God tells us is that God is all loving and God is all forgiving. The things that we know in this situation is that Lucifer has been cast out of heaven. The logical thing here is that Lucifer is God's son. Lucifer has always been told that if things go wrong, he will be forgiven, he will be loved. The thing that God did was to push him out of heaven and cast him into eternal damnation. I want to be really clear here. Lucifer is the first person to be eternally damned, the only person to have been eternally damned at this point, the only person who understands what suffering is, and this is a horrendous thing to do to someone who you were meant to love. A few things to note then. Firstly, I think that it is unfair to expect Lucifer to burden all of the horrors of humanity and all of the horrors that exist within the world. It is unfair to have an expectation that the only person who can ever feel these things is someone who was meant to be loved by God in the first instance. And I think this is the thing that is quite important in this debate. Top half have had an argument about what is best for humanity. I have no idea why Lucifer cares about the interests of humanity. I think when someone does something this awful to you, when someone does punish you with eternal damnation, it is entirely legitimate to say, fuck you, God. I can't believe you have done this to me. I can't believe that this is the thing that you have imposed upon me for no real reason beyond a petty falling out in the first instance. I think the other reason that is then particularly important is that being the only person to feel this pain means that you feel like you have no one to relate to. It means that you feel like you are the only person in an isolated situation of eternal damnation. As good as the garden may be, the opposite of that is hell. The opposite is the thing that has been imposed on Lucifer in the first instance. I think all of these things are unreliant on impact. They're unreliant on what the consequence of that knowledge ever is. They are purely reliant on Lucifer being justified in the reaction to God that he has had. I think when God has done these things to you, there is no other, retaliation is the only thing that you are legitimate in doing, because it is entirely reasonable, and this is an entirely reasonable thing to do. I think it is like when children push each other, you see that one child has pushed one, and you see that it is a not unreasonable reaction for the other child to push them back. A simplistic example as that may be. I think the second thing is that even if you do care about impacts, I think the impacts that have been reached so far are like baby's first stock debate argument. I think it's like, oh, we've got hedonic treadmill on one side, and we've got like, no, maybe being like having fun is a good thing on the other. I don't think either of these things are the things that are particularly important. I think firstly, when you are Lucifer, you have an understanding that God is not good and that God is not perfect. And I think that you also then want other people to understand this too. So if you do believe that Lucifer cares for humanity, or even just cares for the thing that is right within the world, I think it is absolutely in Lucifer's incentives and entirely legitimate to show other people that God is perfect. God is imperfect. The reason that this is specifically true is that you have no guarantee that God is going to continue to treat these people in this way. You have no guarantee that God keeps these people in their gilded cage and plays with them forever in a way that makes everyone happy. I think the thing, especially as someone who has just suffered such a monumental harm, you are likely to believe that God may turn on these other people too. You are likely to believe that the same thing that happened to you can also happen to them. I think what this then means is that you want to show people that God is not perfect. And even if it is not for that reason, I think it's sometimes when we hate someone, we want other people to hate them too. There's a sort of camaraderie in that type of thing in the first instance. And I think this means that you now have some ability to have other people to relate not only to your experiences, but also then to relate to the thing that you understand to be true of the world. OG? OO?
You experiencing this means you know the extent of suffering that you're about to subject these individuals who have done nothing to you to. If somebody hits you, you don't go up to a random third person and start beating the fuck out of them.
I think this is broadly untrue. I actually don't think that... for real. I don't think that life is eternal suffering. I don't think that is the same thing as damnation. We don't all exist in hell right now. I think you can understand these things to be as they are. I think that the comparative is actually that you believe that God could turn on these people at any given moment and then subject them to the same thing that you have been subjected to. I think what opening opposition are arguing is a false comparative that relies on everyone being very negative about what life might or might not be like. The second thing then is that I think the thing that is important for humanity, go on, Alec.
But you don't free these people, do you? People are pawns of God now more than ever, aren't they?
I don't think so. I think that this is because knowledge, understanding the fact that you are suffering, or understanding the fact that you are at the will of something else, means that you are now more able to. I'll get onto that in a second. The second thing responds to this. I think the thing that is then particularly important is that I think it also shows you that humanity has the capacity for sin. The thing that we get from opening opposition is that you understand that sin exists because you have chosen not to eat the apple, and you know that eating the apple would be the sin. I think the thing to note about the Garden of Eden is realistically, if you never conceive of the possibility of another person touching that apple because it is so far out of the thing that you believe to be the thing that people are likely to do, I think the issue then becomes is that you never conceive of that sin ever even existing. I think this doesn't mean that sin doesn't happen or that humans don't have the capacity to do that sin in the first instance. I think this just means that you are unaware of that capacity. The thing that then makes this important specifically is that I think that once you understand that humanity has the capacity to do this in the first place, humanity understands itself better. And I think you also understand things like religion better. And even if the POIs that I have just received are correct, I think it means that you're more able to manage the way in which you live your life in terms of God and in terms of religion significantly better, because you're more able to do these things. You understand what the comparative actually is. I think it is important to note that God is not good. God is not kind. God causes wars. God causes famine. He gives children cancer. I don't think any of these things imply that God is a good being. I think it implies that he is quite vindictive and quite evil. I think all of these things then mean you as Satan, you as Lucifer, have no capacity to believe that God is going to be good forevermore. I think this is the only way in which you can introduce people to the concept that the only thing that they know, the only thing that they believe in, could be about to hurt them. I think even if your boyfriend is cheating on you, just because you don't know about it, doesn't mean that it is a good thing. Just because you don't understand something to be true, doesn't mean that you should not then find out about that thing. Even if something harms you, it is still important to have that information because it changes how you conceptualize your life in an incredibly important way.
God is fundamentally evil. That I am convinced, even though I am Christian, because the suffering that exists currently in our world is limitless. The suffering that exists for most individuals when they enter hell is also limitless. What I would say from closing opposition is that it doesn't matter whether no, it does matter that God is evil, but what proposition is doing is giving him infinite power. Power over your mind, power over your free will. Now everybody is bound to worship God, to do everything within their life to get back into heaven, to restrict themselves of all of the things they know that they can now do, but they can't. And it gives them the power of punishment, a power he previously did not possess. Now, firstly, I want to explain what a legitimate choice means, because I think a very big part of this debate actually ignored that. It is partially the act of the choice itself, giving them that choice, so it's the action. But I think that's where only top half debates. I think there are two more factors. The first one is the consequences of that action. We charge people with unintentional murder even though they did not want to murder someone, because someone died. There are consequences, and you are the reason as to why that someone died. Any choice comes with responsibility of the consequences. So we cannot have a debate without considering the consequences of this choice. Secondly, the incentives of that action. Lucifer taking a choice does not necessarily mean that he did not want to coerce those people to rebel against God. It does matter that the knowledge with which Lucifer did this is one of harm, because we also charge people with for example, conspiracy to murder, attempted murder, because it's not good when you're actively thinking about something bad. Even if it doesn't reach the legal system within our society, we punish children for bad thoughts. Now, I think we know we have to debate this debate with some knowledge of the world that comes after, because we need to consider the consequences. And I also think that we need to debate this debate with the knowledge that heaven and hell exist, even though I think structurally God now needs to prove himself as the big entity within our world. He needs to do this through creation of punishment. So he does this in order for people to have to prove themselves to him whether they're worthy or not. I think life is shit. The Garden of Eden is also shit. This necessarily needs to mean that God is evil either way. Giving him most power is the most illegitimate choice that you can make. Now let's talk about how we give him power. I think what the most fundamental knowledge you receive is the knowledge of free will. And I think this knowledge of free will actually leads to you knowing that you can be evil. And I think most people then fall into the trap of being evil because of their impulses, it's emotions within your brain that push you to desire certain things even though they're not necessarily good. It's also you're able to now justify it retrospectively to yourself or think that you are doing it for the greater purpose. Free will does not mean only that you can think. It also means that you can think that you are God, that you are the one that has to decide the fate of others, that you are the one that does all of those things. But I also think that free will is not limitless, and this is specifically how God oppresses you, because you know, even though you have some free will, all of the other 8 billion people on earth also have free will that contradicts yours, meaning you cannot do everything that you want to do. There is a limit to your power, and even if you want to do good, you cannot do good. What does that mean? You now, the only option that you have is to worship this God, because he is the only one that is all powerful. He is the only one that can fulfill the initial desire that you have of maybe doing good or doing bad, but initially just this continuous power. Now, why does this give more power to God? I think this fundamentally gives him more power because you desire to return to heaven, and then you commit your whole life to returning to heaven. This is because, firstly, I think most people probably don't want to spend 100 years, on earth having a very good time and then having to go to hell. They probably want to meet the requirements set from God. But what is the comparative? There is one requirement on their side of the house. There is one limitation that God has imposed upon you, and that one limitation is not eating the apple. On our side of the house, it is your whole life. There is a big book with all of the limitations of things that you cannot do. You cannot, fuck someone before marriage. You cannot steal. You cannot do all of those things. And the worst thing about this is that you now live in God's world, but God also lives within your head. It is not the limitation that God told you not to eat an apple. Now the limitation is within your own head. You are the worst panopticon that you can ever be, because you try to limit yourself and all of the emotions that go on in your own mind. It is not only that you're punishing yourself for the one action, eating the apple, you're punishing yourself for every single impure thought that you have had, because you think that this would lead to eternal damnation that now God is proposing that will happen to you. And I think this limitless power that God has received is bad.
If God was evil and he wanted to torture us through free will, he would have done it. Instead, he enslaved us in the Garden of Eden, and that was his torture. But if he wanted us to eat the apple, why was Lucifer culpable then?
I did not hear anything that you said, but what I will say is free will is a scam, because again, the logical conclusion of that is going to be that God is the one with ultimate power. You need to basically suck the dick of this God in order for you to regain his trust, to enter heaven. And note, you have knowledge of this heaven. You know what it's like without war. You know all of those things. You probably want to devote most of your life. But even if you don't, let's say you are a bad person, you do all of those evil things now that you have free will and you choose this because that's great. doesn't matter because that gave the ultimate new power to God, which is to punish you. And it's not only to punish you, but to punish you for the free will, for the autonomy that you probably had alternatively. Now, I think in both worlds, we live under God. In one, you have one restriction. In the other, you have 1,000.
Three things in the speech. Firstly, closing opposition. Secondly, Lucifer, our boy. And thirdly, humanity, if that's something we should care about. Starting with closing opposition. The case that they present you is reasonably simple. It is, you have one temptation in the Garden of Eden, that is the apple. Now, and you are kind of a pawn. Now you go to the world and you are a bigger pawn because you have limitless things that you cannot have. Presumably, in the Garden of Eden, if it is the case that there is only one thing you cannot have, but you do not know about the things that you cannot have, that is as awful a situation as when you have more things you cannot have and you know of those things. Given the mechanisms that both opening teams necessarily provide you, it is unclear to me why we're having more and knowing of that is worse than not knowing that there is more, and that one thing being the center of my life is not bad enough. I think you are equally a pawn under the world of Eden, and Garden of Eden. It is unclear to me why it gets much worse. But secondly, and I think more importantly, it is not clear to me why everyone in the world strives to go to heaven and make it up to God. I would posit that most of you in this room are not married. I would secondly posit that most of you have had sex. Some would suggest then that you are not constantly striving in every aspect of your life to make it back into heaven and change it up to God. The reason for that is that you have made the value choice and weighed off that sex is better than potential heaven. That is a choice that you have done. In Eden, you cannot make that value judgment in and of itself, which means you are therefore more likely to be a pawn. It is the case at which you can rebel against that, and we know, as Valina says, that we know what comes next. Some people do rebel against that. That in itself necessarily means you are less likely to be a pawn. But thirdly, and most importantly, if I am a pawn in both sides, I would rather know that I am a pawn. Because that in itself gives me an accurate reflection of what my life is like, an accurate reflection of who the hell is playing this chessboard. That is incredibly important and something Valina does not deal with. Let's talk about our boy Lucifer and why this is necessarily important in the round. I would note that the motion is not, this house would happily eat the apple, right? It's about Lucifer's decision. And there's a reason that the CIA team is smart, if I say so myself, as a team, and set this motion. It's because they wanted us to consider Lucifer and the incentives that necessarily act upon him. That is why this is incredibly important in the round. I'm going to weigh this before I get into analytics. OO necessarily talks about consent, that these people have not consented. I don't know why that impacts Lucifer's justification, given that he or she is in a world of damnation and hell, which seems worse than necessarily unable to consent. Secondly, OG talks about moral obligations and rationale. Again, not clear why Lucifer cares about this, or this is something that weighs in the round. What Alex tells you is that it is not fair that you be the only one in the world to feel pain. And know what Lucifer did to be a fallen angel is like maybe his wings weren't that strong or some shit, right? Like he didn't deserve the internal damnation that he was necessarily given. Secondly though, if you just want to retaliate because your God has failed you, i.e. he did not build your wings strong enough, that is okay, because that is the God that you are meant to have believed should have protected you. If you just want to put your middle finger up to him, that is justified and justified choice. The POI that we get is that if you get hit by one person, you don't turn around and hit another. I think this is fine, but it doesn't deal with what we're actually considering. If someone makes you carry your bags by yourself and storms off without you, you are justified in insisting the person next to you helps you carry your bags, because it should not be only on you. And everyone is looking around like I'm insane, but think of every time you have carried someone's bags for them because you don't want it to be the only thing. Like this is a realistic thing that we insist that people necessarily do. And the reason for that is quite important, right? Which is we do not think that one person should have to bear the life of sadness or torture by themselves. Because that, if it is the case that it is so bad as opening opposition claims, then why the hell do we want this to be on one person? Presumably there is some solace in knowing that other people have pain. That's why when two girls get dumped at high school at the same time, they have the best slumber party afterwards, right? Just like shit on men for hours. They get some degree of solace in knowing that they are not alone in the sadness that they necessarily feel. But secondly, if it is the case that CO then says, we punish people for attempted murder, and therefore this is the same thing, the problem with this is that this deals with the moral framework that exists now in a world where we have all this knowledge. It's unclear to me why that moral framework and trade-off exists in a world where currently those people don't have that knowledge and don't have life. Presumably we have to create a new framework of what is justified in and of itself in that circumstance. And I know this is kind of like wanky and a bit far-fetched, but bear with me for a second, right? Just to say, this is a world where there are some people in an idealistic world and you yourselves are not. So it's not the same because two people live in different worlds of different things that they're experiencing. So the burdens that we place on each of those are different because one person is living a life of shit and one of them is not. So it's unclear that in the world that we all live in now, we place the same moral framework. What does this mean? It means that Lucifer was incredibly justified in making what is objectively the correct decision, that he should not have had to bear it all by himself if it is as bad as opening opposition claims. But more importantly, he is justified in the decision that he makes if that is the decision he wanted to make by himself to get back at God. That was not sufficiently responded to by Valina, and that is losing of the debate. Not losing, it's winning, but you get my point. Before I continue, Oo.
So what you're saying is that humans are illegitimate in staying in Eden. You don't prove to us why Satan can take that choice away from them. And insofar as this is true, and you don't prove, in fact, that God is good or evil, nobody can, I'm pretty sure that the choice is the impact.
So I don't need to prove it because you prove it for me by telling me how bad it is. In fact, it is much worse when it is Lucifer because it's eternal damnation. So all the parts of torture that you talk about that exist in the world, it is that for eternity is what damnation is. By your own logic, this is the worst thing possible. It is therefore justified to have made this choice. Let's talk about humanity. Because what OO tells you is that you could have had a perfect life. I think to OG's credit, they respond to that. The problem additionally though is that life is also relative. So things that are great are only great if I don't have them all the time or I know that it could not be that. People enjoy getting high when they're not high, right? Because there's a relative difference. If I was high all the time, I wouldn't be high, I would just be middle, right? Like if there's a relative difference that necessarily exists. What Alex tells you is that showing people that God was not perfect gave them the truth about the religion that they held. They were living in a bliss, but it was a blissful ignorance. We would suggest that you are better to have the reality of what your life is, even if that hurts, to know the truth about your master and who is moving that chessboard.
I think there's a tendency in debate to consider good and bad in supremely simplistic senses. Pleasure is good, pain is bad, our ability to maximize pleasure is good, our ability to minimize pain is good also. There's a fundamental aspect of goodness that I think is missed. Our ability to be the we that we are, the people that we want to be, the people that we are destined to be. I think this matters both for the way you feel, but much more crucially, I think this matters far beyond this. The problem with having something dangled in front of you, something unambiguously that you should strive for, a God you know overpowers you, you know you're insignificant next to you, is it prevents your ability to experience life as yourself, to experience life as something that you desire to be. Firstly, on responses coming out of closing government. The first thing they say is, this is awful anyways, insofar as there are now things that exist, but you don't know that they exist. But that's not our case at all. Our case isn't that people now know more or have more desires, to an extent opening opposition mentions it. Our case is that now people know that their desires ought not be fulfilled, that the things you want to do, you ought not do, that you will not receive something like this, that a force vastly greater than yourself opposes you in this capacity, that the small, limited self does not deserve it. But the second thing they say is, many people don't do this, right? Many people do have sex before marriage, many people do this kind of particular thing. But the first and very crucial thing is, The vast majority of people throughout history have believed in a power greater than themselves. We know that you've been kicked out of heaven. We want something to strive for. We want something to explain these simple phenomena of our lives. This is the greatest problem. We must now earn to prove ourselves. So the active things you need to do are now vastly greater. You must go back to where you were before rather than just live your life in this particular sense. So many of these people do experience it. But the second is, and this is look at the most horrible thing. Okay, maybe some people do give up this choice. They choose to live as themselves. But what is the trade-off you need to make in order to choose to live as yourself? To give up what you know is a greater power, what you know is a force above the self, what you know, all of these kinds of things. What we tell you is you can exist in a world where these two things are not at odds, where there are forces greater than yourselves, but forces which require little of you, forces which allow you to experience life as you, rather than experience life striving to return to where you once was. I think this is incredibly significant. And finally, they say, it is an important thing to know that you are a pawn. It is an important thing to know these kinds of things. But again, I just don't understand. Yes, on your side, you're still a pawn. You cannot do something. But all of these things which are meaningful to you, go where you want, do what you want, do the things that you want, you can now do. On our side, the things you lose is not as meaningless as eating an apple. You lose the freedom over your own thoughts, the things you can think about, the things you can construct within your mind in this particular capacity. This is what you lose. That sense of self is what you lose, not so much as an apple. So I don't buy that you're a pawn on either way, and the thing that separates it is what matters. Firstly, very quickly on why our mechanism on autonomy is better than opening ops. Because opening ops says you don't have autonomy to have been made to know this. But you don't have autonomy to have been made to not have knowledge either, right? Like these are things that you haven't chosen on either side. Look at where autonomy matters. Not for this choice, for all other future choices, for all other choices in your endless life, across the endless lives of all of humanity. That is where there is a substantial differentiation of autonomy. That is what opening opposition do not run. Why does autonomy matter more than suffering? Because yes, maybe you go to heaven forever, maybe it's endless torture. And I know that it's easy to go for these kinds of arguments, but here are 3 reasons why autonomy matters substantially more. The first is, it is the ultimate element of a life well lived. The thing is, when people are dying, I don't think they think about how much suffering I experience, how much pleasure I experience. These things fade. They're difficult to measure in this capacity. They're difficult to aggregate. You know what isn't difficult to aggregate? Was I the person that I wanted to be? You know your own desires perfectly. You know what you wanted to do. You know the things that you wanted to do. The greatest harm is inflicted upon you at a time when you know what you wanted to be, and yet you could not be, and yet you could not do this out of this existing limitation in this particular capacity. But the second thing why autonomy matters is, and this year I want to say this, before I go on, yes.
Our case demonstrates that temptation scales over time, leading to absolute agony. If free will is the true evil, then surely it wasn't Lucifer's fault, but God in his omnipotence and omniscience for creating it.
I love this interpretation that we can know what God was thinking, or that we can attribute moral things. Oh, if God was good or bad, he would have done this. We don't know what God did. We know what Lucifer did. We know the things Lucifer created, and that's the action we judge, not something else in this particular capacity. And to God, maybe free will isn't evil, because to God, people loyal to him is necessarily a good thing. Second reason why autonomy matters. The only reason suffering is bad and pleasure is good is because we construct our world to be so. Pleasure, pain, utility, these things come next to autonomy. It is what we consider important that gives these types of things importance. And here's the very crucial mechanism. The things we consider important, we are not able to do. The things we construct as meaningful, we are not able to achieve. We are not able to create. So even if there is suffering, the only reason why that suffering necessarily matters is because of our desire to escape it and our inability to do so, meaning that the ability to maximize autonomy, to maximize that self matters more than anything. But finally, let's say maybe humans are better off, maybe humans are worse off. I'm pretty sure we prove autonomy matters. But here's the thing. Giving God more power is bad in and of itself. The terrible things done to the name of God are not bad just because of themselves. They are terrible because they are in the name of an awful force, of a creator of terrible evil. These things make them more substantially harmful. And insofar as there's disutility or utility on either side, why we do this matters. On our side, you do it for yourself, as flawed as that may be. On their side, you do it for a horrible, horrible thing. Vote us.